Hey, greetings, friends and fellow practitioners. My name is Dr. Jeff Stark, and I am the director for the Center for Theological Leadership here at Olivet Nazarene University. And I want to welcome you to the first of our virtual conversation series for this winter and spring of 2021 called Lead Well. Throughout the course of the next few months, we're going to be having an opportunity to hear from a variety of leaders, practitioners, and authors covering a spectrum of very meaningful content for us within the various realms that you and I live and minister. The first of which in these conversations is my friend and pastor, Jon Ferguson. Jon Ferguson is the co-founding pastor of Community Christian Church that was originally sort of started out of Naperville, but now has spread out across the Chicagoland areas. They're a multi-campus, growing church that has had significant impact in a number of different ways. One of those ways has been in church planting and multiplication. They have a history of multiplying leaders and being extremely intentional in all that they do of helping people find their way back to God. That is sort of not only the mantra that you'll see on their wall, but the sort of the compelling force that drives all of their action. And we are blessed to have with us today Jon Ferguson, who is going to spend some time talking to us about the new release from Jon and his brother Dave, who is the other part of that co-founding pastor team. They just released a brand new book called B.L.E.S.S, and it's this book right here. You can get it on all of your major outlets for books, Barnes and Noble. You can get it through Amazon. And it's 5 everyday ways to love your neighbor and change the world. Now, I've had the opportunity to know Jon now for the last several years, but honestly, in the last couple of years, we've become particularly close as we now live only about 1.5 miles from one another in the heart of the city of Chicago. So if you hear a rumbling in the background during this interview, it's either going to be cars and sirens going past his house or the L, which is about 100 feet from my house right outside my window. So we live and operate and minister in the city of Chicago, sort of run across each other's paths quite a bit, and I am thankful for that. Jon, it is such a privilege to have you with us today and to really launch these conversations that are going to be taking place and unfolding over the course of the next few months. We've got Esau McCauley out of Wheaton. We've got Todd Bolsinger out of Fuller. We have Deidre Brow-Lotz, who is from the Nazarene Theological College in Manchester. And then we have Tara Beth Leach and Scott McKnight will be with us in May. And you are launching us off in this series. So listen, no pressure on you at all.
I'm just glad I'm first.
That's right. They've got to follow you. That's the part of this.
Follow that group. I'll tell you what, right now, man, that's a great lineup. Wow.
It is a great lineup. We're really excited about these conversations. So, Jon, I have a
bunt single, man. Just get on first base, Ferguson. The rest of them will knock you in. You'll be okay.
I have no doubt that will be you'll swing for the fence here. I believe that. Jon, I want to tell you, I have been thankful for many of the tools that Community Christian has consistently put out, that you have made available to really anyone, to learn from, to grow with, to utilize. And this tool that you have been working through for the last 8 years has been especially meaningful for me in the work that I'm doing here in the city. And it's the practices of B.L.E.S.S. And I want you to start off by telling us every book has its origin, every set of practices has its origin. So what's the origin story of B.L.E.S.S? Why did you and Dave feel like it was necessary to help your people imagine how they could daily impact their circles of influence?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jeff, just let me say thank you again for the opportunity to be with you today. And I love talking about these B.L.E.S.S practices with Jeff because, anybody that knows Jeff knows he's a professor, but he's also a practitioner, and he lives it out. And so when he talks about principles like this, it's because he's not only wanting to deliver great information and see churches transform, but also because he actually practices it and puts it to work right here in Lincoln Park where we live. So it was a really good day when Jeff Stark and Angela and his family moved to Lincoln Park. I was just thrilled and excited that we've had the chance to work closer together. You mentioned a couple of things already, Jeff. you mentioned helping people find their way back to God. And so I'll just kind of use that as a jumping off point if you're okay with it. That is our mission. And, early on in the life of community, I mean, this was back probably 18 months into the start. There were just a handful of us. We went to a small group training conference, and it was led by Lyman Coleman. Now, you might not know the name Lyman Coleman, but a lot of people probably know the name Robert Coleman. Robert Coleman wrote Master Plan of Evangelism, worked at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. I may still be doing that as far as I know. Lyman is Robert's brother. So I have a little bit of affinity for Lyman, the lesser known, better looking younger brother. But Lyman was passionate about people who are far from God. And he's kind of a tall, thin, gray-haired guy. And he did these conferences on training people to lead small groups that were open, that were about reaching lost people. And inevitably, at some point in the day, in the training, he would kind of shift gears a little bit and begin to tell the story of the prodigal son. And just with complete passion, he would say, you know what? Truth is, we're all prodigals, and we're all surrounded by prodigals in our neighborhoods, in our communities every single day. All those people desperately need to find their way back to God. And I'll tell you what, man, I mean, we heard that, it was like, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. We knew that was going to be our mission statement. And, I can't help it. If you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 17 to 20, I'm just going to read it. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Please.
When anyone lives in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone. The new is here. All this is from God. He brought us back to himself through Christ's death on the cross. And he's given us the task of bringing others back to him through Christ. God was bringing the world back to himself through Christ. He did not hold people's sins against them. God has entrusted us with the message that people may be brought back to him. So we are Christ's official messengers. It is as if God were making his appeal through us. Here's what Christ wants us to beg you to do. Come back to God. And so, that is what makes our heart beat fast, is, really to reach people who are far from Jesus. And so, what we found was when we kind of decided on that as our mission statement, you're putting it on your website. As Jeff said, you can hardly walk through one of our facilities without seeing on the wall, any printed material, it's there. Ed Stetzer came to community one time, and I'll never forget, we had lunch afterwards, and we were sitting around the lunch table, and he just says 13 times. And I'm like, okay, 13 times what, Ed? And he goes, I heard helping people find their way back to God 13 times from the moment I walked through the doors to the time I left. I think he was a little tired of it. But you know what? I mean, we hope that it's an important phrase for people to remember. But it is more than that. I mean, it really is what we're passionate about, what drives us. It's the Great Commission. And people, the truth is, people did catch on to it. People knew it. They could restate it. I mean, like I said, it's on our website, it's in our buildings. But it's interesting, a number of years ago, and this would probably be in that 8-year range, we began to think, people know it, but I don't feel like they really have some hooks that they can hang their hat on to actually live it out. And I think most Christ followers recognize and are compelled by what Christ has done in their life. They want to reach their friends with the gospel, with the good news of Jesus, right? And so, we started kind of thinking that through and go, okay, how could we actually help people live this out? When they wake up in the morning, they think about helping people find their way back to God, but what could that look like in very practical ways? And so, we started looking at scripture, and we began to realize that, we have a God that is a sending God. He sent Abraham, right? Told Abraham, I will bless you, I will make your name great, and through you, I will bless all people. Abraham wasn't just blessed to kind of soak it in and feel good about it, right? Well, it's still great to be blessed. No, he's blessed to be a blessing. And then if you look to the New Testament, you look at the life of Christ, it's amazing how many times Jesus actually went about blessing people. It actually even used those words. I mean, his greatest teaching and most well-known teaching gives us 9 ways we can live a blessed life, right? Over and over again, he blessed the children. He blessed Zacchaeus when he had a meal with Zacchaeus. Then you look in Galatians, and I think that's chapter 3 or 4, Paul says we're actually faithful followers in the footsteps of Abraham, and we too are blessed. Again, not blessed so we can enjoy it, soak it in, sit back. No, blessed to be a blessing. And so that word blessed kind of hung with us. And then we started looking at the life of Jesus. And we found, if you look across his life, I mean, there were a lot of different ways that he blessed, but 5 ways sort of came to the surface. And when we started looking at those a little bit more, we were fortunate as pastors, they formed an acronym or an acrostic, I mean.
and that's what I was going to say is it is not truth for a pastor unless it's an acronym, an acrostic, or alliteration. And I just actually did it right there. So
you could have thrown an anagram, I think, too, couldn't you, or something like that?
So if you would do us a favor, would you take a moment and share with us what each of the 5 practices are as a part of B.L.E.S.S?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I think the beauty of it is that, this acrostic actually does spell the word bless. And so it takes us back to that biblical principle that, we see God speaking to Abraham, we see Jesus living it out, and then we see Paul saying, you know what, hey, yep, we're to be about that as well. So grounded in the Old Testament, lived out by Jesus, and then, visible in the early church. So yeah, I can briefly, I'll kind of walk through, and if any questions pop up, don't hesitate to cut me off and ask, but I'll try to be brief and we can dig into them a little bit deeper if you need to after that. But yeah, it's B is for begin with prayer, Jeff. And I know that's a bit of a stretch there, okay, to make the acrostic work, but it does get better. And, when Jesus started his earthly mission, Luke tells us they went out on a mountainside and he prayed, right? And I think over and over again, we see Jesus retreating to pray. And so we tell people, if you're not sure who God is calling you to bless, you can begin with prayer. Prayer is really both how you discover your mission, but it's also how you live it out. And, if you already know the people you want to bless, begin praying for those people, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're not sure how to pray for them, I always tell people, pray for them in the way you would want to be prayed for. Mm-hmm. It's almost like the golden rule, I guess, of prayer, pray for others as you would want them to pray for you. So the B is for begin with prayer. And let me say about that B too, I think sometimes we minimize that, right? Minimize it. And it's just pray. No, praying is actually being on mission. That counts. Okay.
Yes.
The B is for begin with prayer. The L is for listen. Asking questions and then listening was completely central to Jesus' life. He asked way more questions than he ever answered. As a matter of fact, I don't know if this number is completely accurate, but from what I understand, of the 183 different questions he was asked, he only answered a handful. And most of the time he just responded with more questions.
John, I think that chapter for me leapt out at me. One, I've seen you do this in every conversation I've ever had with you. You are insatiably curious about people. And that's one of the elements that I think sticks out. One of our adjunct professors at Olivet University, when he did his doctoral program, he did it on curiosity. And he talks about how the church needs to learn to be curious. And so talk to us a little bit about how your curiosity fuels your engagement with the people around you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an extrovert, and I think the pandemic has led me to realize just how much of an extrovert I am. In the past, maybe I was leaning a little more introvert, but no, I need to be around people. And so, I do have a natural sort of interest in people. And so I think that kind of fuels that. But I think for all of us, I love this quote from David Augsburger. I can't remember the name of the book, but he says, being heard is as close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable.
Oh, I love that.
And it's so true. I mean, and you think about the people in your life, Jeff, that dial in. I mean, it feels like you're the only person in the room. There are few better ways to communicate love than to truly listen to somebody. And now I need to do that as well with my wife as I do with and my kids as I do with other people, right? But I think, we underestimate the power of listening. And I am naturally curious. Maybe it comes a little easier for me than it does for other people. But I think it's a powerful way for us to bless people.
One of the things you've mentioned to me numerous times that I think has stuck with me is that this listening that you're calling us to do, this genuine curiosity, this is not a manipulative tactic. Like, this isn't, I'm listening to you so that I can get you to do something. This is, I'm listening to you because I value you as a human being. And I think that informs a certain kind of posture of being with people. And I really appreciate that as it's come through in this text and as I've witnessed it in your life as well.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because I think all of us, it can't, in some ways, who was it? 7 Habits, begin with the end in mind. When it comes to bless, you really can't begin with the end in mind, because you don't know where the end is going to be, right? And I think, we're just called to love and bless people. Yeah. And, it may be your beginning with prayer, listening, eating, we'll get into them later, serving. Jeff, eventually it leads to the opportunity where I have to tell somebody the story of the difference that Jesus has made in my life. And I get to see them kind of, cross that line, or however you want to put it, where they choose to follow Jesus. But it was all that you did, all the blessing that you did on the front end that actually resulted in that. We got to let God take care of that. We just do the best we can to bless them and love them. And you're right. It can't be, we can't be doing it in hopes of a certain or particular result. We're praying for that, but we just don't know how God's going to operate.
I want to thank you right there on behalf of everybody listening who is waiting for us to name the other 3 letters, because we got through the first 2. And there was someone listening to this right now who's like, wait a minute, are they going to get to the E and to the other 2 S's? So when you named those, there was a relief that rippled through this video. And so I really appreciate you doing that for those folks. So we've talked about beginning with prayer and listening. Now let's move to my favorite of the 5. Which is eating.
Absolutely. Yes. And eating is my favorite too. And you know what? I think it might've been one of Jesus's favorites also, because he liked to eat. I mean, over and over, right? We find him sharing meals with tax collectors, sinners. He was accused of hanging out with drunkards, right? But I think we'd all agree there's just something about sharing a meal together that moves any relationship from acquaintance to friendship faster than almost anything else we can do. I think we've all probably experienced that at a time or another, where, you kind of knew somebody, and then, they invite you to go to a meal, or you invite them, or maybe they come over, whatever the case might be. And you have that meal, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. I mean, we're like friends now, right? And so I think that's the power of eating. I mean, so many examples of Jesus, having meals. I mean, good night. The one thing that he asked us to continue to do, right, is to gather around the Lord's Supper for a meal, right? Over and over again, decades, centuries later. And so sharing a meal, I think it's just a powerful way to go and bless, the people around you. So yeah, you got begin with prayer for those of us that want to make sure we complete the acrostic here. Listen, eat, and then the first S in bless is serve. And, Jesus couldn't have been more direct, right? When he said this about himself: the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to what? Right, to serve.
Yeah, right.
And I think he modeled for us that if you begin with prayer, you listen, you eat with somebody, you're going to discover how you can best serve that person that God is asking you to bless. And,
as you think about the serve, and I've always thought this is probably underemphasized within the church, but if you read John chapter 13, as Jesus moves to this final meal that he's going to have with his disciples, the Bible, the story of John actually says that at the meal, he shows him the full measure of his love. Now, for us, we think the full measure of his love, that comes the next day, right? But John seems to illustrate that the full measure of his love was in the way in which he was serving his fellow friends and disciples by washing their feet. And then he says that crazy statement. He says, if you want to be blessed, go do that.
Yeah, right on. Exactly.
And so when we think about the opportunities, so perhaps you have someone that's out there who doesn't necessarily feel like, I know all my theology, but if you got a lawnmower, you could be a blesser, right? I mean, you can note the person down the road, the couple who can't get out and take care of there are opportunities. And I think when I read these principles, John, I find myself going, this opens the door. This doesn't professionalize ministry. This doesn't give you a certain thing you got to memorize. This invites creativity. So in your ministry experience, maybe even from what you've witnessed through the writing of this book, what are some of the creative service things that you've seen or experienced that you've gone, that's blessing neighbors?
Well, and I have seen some creative ones, but if I could push back just a little bit, I'm
Yeah.
honestly a little more intrigued by the simple everyday ones because it reminds me that you don't have to be that creative. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's good.
even in the pandemic, okay, I think it'd be easy for us to say, oh yeah, well, blessed practices. How are we going to do this now?
Yeah.
Well, social distancing may mean you have to get creative. Okay, so
Yeah.
here comes some creative stuff. But it could be, creative in this environment in a pandemic. Could be as simple as writing a thank you note to your local grocer or
Mhm.
first responder, right? Offer to have a meal delivered to somebody who could use it, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to come anywhere near them with the delivery systems we now have for meals. Just this past week, our neighbor right here had surgery on her leg. And so, Lisa and I, we went to the store, we put together a little simple care package for her and dropped it off. We stayed 6 feet apart. There was social distancing, but it was a real simple and practical way for us to, show the love of Jesus to her and serve her at a time when she's, got to be sitting around recovering from that surgery on her leg.
Yeah. We have a common friend who just a few weeks ago chased down his UPS driver in order to bless the UPS driver with a little token of gratitude for doing all the hard work that they've had to do throughout this quarantine time and COVID. And I think about just
Yeah.
the impact that he explained that this had on that man who drives a UPS truck.
And again, I think the key on this, Jeff, is just how do we keep these in our consciousness? Because they're not hard to do. They really aren't. They don't cost us anything. But I think the key is how do you have it in your consciousness? So you're always thinking, okay, how can I bless? Who can I bless? What would it look like? I mean, sometimes it's a simple. When I go to Big Apple, the local grocer here, over on Clark, and you know, blessing the folks in there is, to me, it's just being a little extra friendly, even when I don't feel like it or I'm tired or I'm in a hurry. No, I'm going to pause as they're ringing up my groceries and say, so how you doing? Try to remember their name, as they're bagging my groceries, just kind of ask them how business is going. It really isn't rocket science. I think it's having that consciousness that we are representatives of Jesus. We may be the only reflection of Christ anyone ever comes into encounters, and so we gotta take advantage of that.
That's good. That is good. So we've begun with prayer, listened, you eat, you serve. Now explain to us the last S.
All right, yeah, the last S. If there's anybody that's still waiting to fill their blanks in, give me a little drum roll. Sorry. I can laugh at that because I know you would want every blank filled in, Jeff.
I would want every blank. That's correct.
And
Yes.
I would too. I would too. But I think like you said, we listen, we eat, we serve, and finally, when people are ready to listen, we could very likely have a chance to tell our story. I mean, I think that's how it worked for Jesus, right? Like when doubting Thomas came to him asking, how can we know the way? Jesus said, well, hey, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, right? No one comes to the Father except through me, a relationship with me. And so, when you befriend and bless people, I think they're going to begin to feel relationally safe, and they're going to want to know your story. And then you can tell them how the love of Jesus, his life, his death and resurrection has changed your life. And yeah, story is last on purpose. Again, I mean, the story of Jesus, the gospel needs to be proclaimed without a doubt. Okay. But I think when it comes to personal relationships, man, if we will take the time to walk through these practices, we'll probably find more opportunities to proclaim the gospel to people in powerful ways than we ever dreamed possible.
So are you suggesting that doesn't happen overnight? Like, are you suggesting that you don't just meet someone in the very next moment? You're just that for me has been one of the most helpful reminders. And you and I have talked about this. In fact, you've got a personal story of sometimes it takes as much as 6 years before you really get to that point of really seeing someone take that journey. The relationships that I've forged here in this community over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, it has been at times what feels like slow going, and yet as you've cared deeply, people respond reciprocally, and they care about what you care about, and they ask you those questions. But I think you got to be willing to put in the time. Am I right?
Absolutely. And you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, if this person never came to know Jesus, would you still do this? And I think the answer has to be absolutely yes, right? I mean, the greatest commandment is to love God and love others. It's not love God and love others if they make a commitment to Christ. It's just you do that, and then down the road, you hope and pray they will. Yeah, I mean, I have a friend who, I haven't been completely consistent with these blessed practices, but I have been intentional. He's been on my prayer list. In my journal, I always have the word bless written and then a list of people that I feel like God's wanting me to bless. He's one of them. And I've probably been, interacting with him and trying to bless him for 6-7 years. And so, yeah, it's way too slow. I mean, and I think you do sometimes kind of ask yourself, oh man, I hate to even say, is it worth it? Or, but man, oh man, if it was me on the other end, I hope somebody would say that it was worth it because there's so much at stake. So yeah, it's kind of a slow cooker sometimes, my friend.
John, that statement is golden. If it was me on the other end, I would hope someone would say it was worth it.
Yeah.
That's powerful to think about. That's living out the golden rule. I mean, that's literally all this is doing unto others what you would want them to do to you. And if you'd want someone to take that time, if you want someone to invest in that way, then you're making that investment.
Yep.
So let me ask you a question. This is a personal question. So you spent the better part of 20, I mean, Community Christian's 30 years old, right? You spent the better part of 20 of that fully invested in the daily operations of church, which is what many of the folks listening to this do regularly. Yep. Then you shifted and you moved into the downtown area of Chicago, and it forced a new set of patterns and habits. Talk to us about how B.L.E.S.S has informed this new space and new set of patterns for you as a pastor who's been pastoring for 30 years.
Yeah, great question. I think the move to the city, I was like 10 years ago, so 20 years into our ministry at Community. And we just got to a place where we felt like, the need is so dramatic and the opportunity is so great in the city. You really, when you think about the percentage of people that are churched or the number of vital, like life-giving churches that are on the city, there's so few compared to the suburbs that we felt like as a church, we needed to do something in the city, and a lot of good work going on in the city. It wasn't like we were coming in to save the city, but we felt like if we got there, we could start some churches. We could also come alongside some existing churches, right? And help them maybe strengthen and grow and be even more effective. But on a personal level, I think we all know, I mean, the U.S. is drifting more and more towards a pre-Christian sort of environment, right? But I think it's more dominant in the city. I really do. I mean, for the most part, and this has been challenging and difficult, church is irrelevant or an afterthought, I think, at best in the city. And so, as a new church, no facility, I think, church is even less of a consideration. And now throw COVID into the mix, right? And it's even further convinced me that, quite honestly, these blessed practices really are what are going to make the difference in us equipping every believer to now be the front door that maybe, having that physical presence, or, I mean, in Community's situation, we haven't had in-person services now since last March. And so, I mean, talk about a shift. Moving down here was a shift. I think now it's another shift where it's just reminding me that, we've got to equip every single person, to be a living and breathing example of Jesus where they are to the people around them. We've got to equip them to do that. And I mean, I'm biased, but I think this is one of the most practical tools I've seen that really helps people kind of get in their head and remember, okay, what would it look like for me to be a blessing today?
Yeah.
And again, it's not going to be an overnight deal, but what Paul said, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, and but it's God who makes it grow, right? So, we got to leave that up to God. I think we get overly concerned with the outcomes sometimes.
Yeah.
We all hope and pray for the opportunity to, proclaim the gospel, give a verbal witness, whatever you want to call it, and we need to be ready to do that. But I think you begin with prayer, you listen, you eat, and you serve, and then I think you'll have a greater chance to verbally explain or proclaim the gospel message of Jesus' love and grace to people.
And the beautiful thing is that this works in any context. It really does. It doesn't matter if it's city, rural, suburban. When I moved to a small rural town in Tennessee, the town itself was 2,000 people. The entire county was 8,000. One of the first commitments I made was the eating piece, and I would set up camp at the local diner where all of the sort of town gatekeepers gathered in the mornings, and I would show up and I would eat with them, and from that a relationship blossomed, and they felt as though they could trust me. I learned to trust them. They were the ones that held the keys to all the information in the community. They're the ones that needed the backing if you were gonna do anything meaningful in the community. And there was something beautiful and synergistic that happened there just simply by showing up, ordering the omelet, eating the bacon, listening to the same old story over and over again. But there's a bond and a kinship, and that happened in a rural community. And so I think the beauty of these practices is that they're translatable in any culture and in any place. It just requires you to show up and be present.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. And yeah, I think,
so let me ask you this. Okay, so in the book there's a quote here, and we got a couple more minutes here.
Okay.
It says, "Our mission lies wherever our feet take us. We start with where we live, where we work, where we play, where we hang out, and in our neighborhood. Those are the people we serve." I love that. I love that we don't oftentimes see the full scope of all of the different places I come into contact with. Now, given this unique moment in history, this has been a trying and difficult season for many people who live in America for a variety of different reasons. Why is this the time for the book? Yeah. Why does this matter now for us where we are?
Well, if you want to know the truth, we could have got somebody to publish it earlier. We would have. That was the answer you were looking for.
That's not what I was looking for. I'm going to call it Providence, John.
Built up this question. Yeah, well, it is interesting, Jeff. There's an appendix in the book, How to Bless in a Pandemic.
Yeah.
And we added that, as we realized when this was going to be coming out. But I'm also intrigued by the response that we're seeing already. So many people are saying, "Oh, perfect time for this book. Oh, I needed this. This is exactly what we need right now." And I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think a lot of pastors and individual Christ followers had that same frustration. They want to share the love of Jesus with people. They want to share the gospel, but it too often feels awkward or like a bad sales pitch. It doesn't feel natural. And what Jesus was known as a friend of sinners. I mean, wouldn't you love to just be known as a friend of sinners? I mean, like, if you could be known as a friend of sinners, you're way down the path, right? I mean, and so I think this is a way to become a friend of sinners, is just, be a good friend, And in this pandemic that we're in right now, and the turmoil that we're experiencing on so many fronts, I hope we're recognizing that you don't need a building to reach people with the gospel, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You can do every one of these practices, even during a pandemic. Again, order carry out for your neighbor, buy extra toilet paper or disinfectant wipes and share them with the people in your building, shovel the snow off your neighbor's wall. And you can still have meaningful conversations, right? As long as you keep your distance. Or, when it comes to listening, try making a phone call. Yeah. Remember those voice-to-voice calls? Remember we used to do that where you're not looking at somebody or texting, you're actually talking. Right. Man, I mean, our world is so stinking divided, so negative. I mean, so much about who is right and who is wrong and how can I be more right than you are. I think more than ever, our world needs Christ followers to simply be a blessing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, one last question for you, John, and this one is a practical question.
Okay.
If someone were to pick up this book for their church, for maybe a small group, talk to us about some of the ways in which you can imagine this book to be deployed tactically within church settings.
Yeah, well, first of all, we do have a small group discussion guide that we can make available. So if anybody's interested in that, they should be able to find information about that at B.L.E.S.S book.org. B.L.E.S.S book.org. There's bulk pricing available too if you want to buy a whole bunch for folks and do a training session on that. We're also going to have just short, like 5 to 7 minute training videos for each one of the chapters. Try to keep those brief. They kind of stimulate your thinking a little bit more. But those are some real practical ways. I think the best way to live this out is to find at least 1 or 2 people. In the book, you'll find there's a sort of a blessed pledge where you agree with 2 other people. You actually sign your name that we're going to be about these blessed practices. And so you're in that little triad, kind of holding each other accountable. And then also become a part of a small group where when you show up at that group, you're actually asking each other every week, who are you blessing? What did it look like? And guess what? Don't forget, begin with prayer. Prayer counts. So it's not like you're going to show up and feel guilty for not doing what you should have done. Good night. You could remember you're going to be asked that question on the way to small group and say a prayer, and you've done your homework.
Right.
Not you or I would ever do that.
No, never. No, no, never.
But yeah,
especially those of us that are achievers who know we have to get our quota in for the day. Yeah.
But those are some practical ways that I think you can really use this material. And we do have actually have an entire B.L.E.S.S series that we've done on Sunday mornings, messages, images, message manuscripts. If people would like access, they get access to that also at B.L.E.S.S-book.org. So we want to do whatever we can. And feel free to send me a note if I can be of help. Jon Ferguson at communitychristian.org. And we'll do whatever we can to equip you and help you do the best you can to help people practice these ways of loving people and changing the world.
Jon, it's always such a gift to spend time and have conversations with you. You have helped us today. And I want to remind all of us that you can pick up this book, B.L.E.S.S, 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbor and Change the World. And I can't encourage people enough to pick this up. And I hope you don't just pick this up for yourself. I hope you put this in the hands of someone that is in your ministry, small group leaders, your Sunday school teachers. Buy this and start to spread this, because our world desperately needs Christians to take up the call to action. And that action looks like blessing. And it's easy to do. It's easy, practical steps. And it's a difference maker in so many lives. We don't have to stand on great platforms all the time. We just simply have to bend our hearts and our knees to love and come alongside and serve others. And I think that is something that we can all do. So I want to thank you again, Jon. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And again, if you need any information, that's B.L.E.S.S-book.org. You can get that information there. I do want to remind you, so every month over the course of the next 5, we will be having these kind of conversations. Some of them will actually be live, where you'll be able to be a participant in the conversation and ask questions live. We'll be getting more information out. Next month, I do want to remind you, it is going to be Dr. Esau McCaulley, and he wrote this phenomenal book, Reading While Black, and the subtitle is African American Biblical Interpretation as an Exercise, and I love this, as an exercise in hope. And so we'll be having that conversation in February. Looking forward to. He is a professor at Wheaton, and that's also going to be a great conversation for you to be a part of. And so thank you for tuning in today. And hopefully, as the Center for Theological Leadership, we exist to inspire, equip, and empower leaders within the variety of different areas of ministry that you are part of, and to bring meaningful, substantive resourcing to you so that it makes a difference in your life, in your ministry. So God bless you, and may the next few months be a blessing to you and to your ministry.